Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Teacher's Point of View. I can't believe I've got this lady back on. I'm in for season 2, and she was genuinely one of my favourites since in season 1, and since we've got to know each other a little bit, haven't we? And you know what, it's been an absolute pleasure to get to know you and what you stand for. And guys, I'm going to pass it over to this wonderful lady, Dr. Victoria Carr, who's had an immense career, travelled the world, and there's actually who actually loves her little primary school is it Cheshire West, isn't it? Woodlands Primary School. So I'll pass it over to you. Like, how have the last couple of weeks been in the new year?
Wow, the last couple of weeks. Well, I think the last couple of weeks kind of illustrate the last 9 months pretty well. In the last couple of weeks, we've seen threats from the government, we've seen power plays, popularity contests, we've seen them controlling people in education through threat of legal action. And I think that probably sums up the last 9 months. We haven't seen any clarity, we haven't seen any collaboration. There's been very little focus on safety of people working in schools. And what there has been is several situations that could have been avoided. There have been lots of U-turns and lots of mixed messages, lots of confusion, and that's the last 2 weeks. But I think that really does exemplify what's happened in the last 9 months, really. So over Christmas, when I was forced to isolate because the government refused to behave like perhaps Wales and Scotland did and closed schools a week early, to enable people who worked in schools and children to be able to see their families safely, if that was possible. I was forced to isolate. I was completely on my own for Christmas because I was in contact with somebody the week before Christmas at school who tested positive. So then, following the rules, as you do, not only was I working right up until Christmas Eve, but also I was forced to isolate from my entire family. So Christmas really was a bit of a non-starter, not just for me, because that decision influenced the Christmas holiday of about 130 children, staff and their families. And I thought that was really pants. I think had they listened to anybody in the education sector who said simply, let us go to remote learning for the week before the holiday, that entire situation could have been avoided. And, you know, even if you're isolating with your family, you know, that would have been preferential to isolating completely alone, which a lot of our families had to do because they had vulnerable members of their extended family in their bubble, so they couldn't see anybody over Christmas at all. And I thought that was a real shame. It was interesting though to see so many colleagues in London vindicated for their decisions. Obviously they were making the right decisions for their communities, their schools, and I thought, you know, brave and sensible, compassionate, empathetic decisions that they made, and the government just showed themselves for the charlatans that they are, for threatening them with legal action. And how foolish did they look actually when only a matter of days afterwards it all came out that there was this horrible variant that was just, you know, the exponential rate in virus transmission and hospital admissions just proved that they were trying to do the right thing. And, you know, the government tried to prevent them from doing the right thing. And you just think, for what purpose? Whose benefits? All it did was show that they could exert control, that they had power, and that they could, if they wanted, exert control. And I think, you know, my year 6 boys here sometimes flex their guns. And that's funny when you're 11 and you're trying to show that you're tough or powerful. But it's not funny when you're in charge of a country where there's a pandemic that's taken hold of you, and when you are essentially the laughingstock of the whole of the Northern Hemisphere, because it is out of control. It's rife in our country. And so for whose benefit was that show of power before Christmas? Because it didn't benefit the government at all. They're losing popularity left, right and centre, despite the fact that they had this idea that, oh yeah, everyone mixes for Christmas, it'll keep us popular. It was stupid. It was ill-considered. It wasn't based on science or safety at all. And lo and behold, they had to do a U-turn on that. And in any case, allowing it to even begin to happen for a day has meant a huge spike in cases. So, yeah, the last couple of weeks, I'd say, exemplifies an awful lot of problems that we've seen all year through, and particularly in the last 10 days. Yeah, I think they absolutely knew that the right thing to do was to call it and to close schools, and they didn't. They waited, thinking that then the negativity would be directed towards unions who sensibly all collaborated together with the safety and the best interests of their members at heart, which is absolutely the right thing to do. And I suppose they thought they could pin the blame on school closures on the unions and make it about kind of left-wing, people who were lazy, didn't want to work, etc. When actually what it was about all the time was about the safety of the staff members in school and the children and their families. And it backfired on them because, lo and behold, they've had to close schools largely, although I say that tongue-in-cheek because schools are not closed. And again, indicative of the way that they work is that the guidance came out 4 days after we were told to close schools. So we've all operated on guidance from the previous lockdown and made plans and provisions, and everything was up and running by the next day. People worked into the night and set it all up. And what happened? 4 days later, they've widened the scope, completely undermined relationships between school and parents yet again. And people are left confused. There's no clarity, there's no consistency. How can you go to work in an early years or a nursery setting with 30 or 60 children, but you can't see your family member, or you're not allowed to do that 1 year later when they're in reception, or 2 years later when they're in year one? Makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And because they refuse to listen to anybody sensible in the sector, what will continue to happen is that those transmission rates will continue to remain high. And this issue that we're living with all the time, that's restricting all of our lives, will just drag on.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of you've raised a few good points actually, but kind of just go to the first one. I mean, you've obviously had to isolate during Christmas. It's like after the year we've had, it could have been that one point that just made it worthwhile to be able to spend it with your family, right? And that's kind of almost taken away from you. I mean, I had my sister who's an assistant head teacher, and her son basically was tested positive for COVID. I mean, because of like the way that schools closed down and how they were asked to stay until the end. I mean, I didn't get to see my sister on Christmas. I mean, I haven't really seen her properly since COVID, like restrictions first came into play. So, I mean, I completely understand the frustrations, and I feel the frustrations in that respect too, because it just wasn't the same this year, like Christmas, and it's a shame. And like, I mean, it's a really good point, and this is what a lot of people don't understand in some respects is like, well, teachers, you've got a job to do. At least you've got a job, but no, I mean, you're still human beings. And you still got, like, your safety is still important. And I think ultimately, they made such a bad call not shutting schools a few days early. And you're absolutely right. I found it atrocious that they tried to sue Greenwich Council for trying to shut the schools down when ultimately all they were trying to do was look out for the best interest of their schools. Yeah, you're right again. Like I mean, ultimately they've had to go back on the decision. I mean, they knew just before Christmas that the viral rate. I mean, the rates of infection was really high. They knew it was affecting children far more than the first variant of the virus. So ultimately, I don't know how they've decided on what they've decided, but ultimately it was definitely the wrong decision to do. We could all see it happening. We could all see us coming back in January and them shutting schools down because how bad the infection rate had gone. I mean, what would you have wanted in that situation? I know you obviously would have wanted them to close or give you more clarity, but it's a forever developing virus, isn't it? I mean, they're always trying to keep up to date with the guidelines themselves in some respects and trying to gain advice. I mean, what's your argument in terms of why they failed in that situation?
I think they're just very dogmatic. I think this idea that we need schools open to provide childcare is very clear that is their mission. And I think that what they're trying to do is financial. I think they're trying to minimise the amount of money they have to give people in order to incentivise them not to go to work. So if you're in a job where you could be furloughed and you could be paid to stay at home, then that involves the government paying you to do that. And the one way of avoiding doing that is by sending your children to school, which is okay as long as you then allow the people in school who are working to make sure it is as safe as it possibly can be. But they're not allowing us to do that. So, in primary schools, we're not allowed to wear masks. Everywhere else you go, everywhere you go, in every shop, on public transport. Everywhere else you go, you have to wear a mask. But in a primary school, you're not allowed to wear a mask. You know already that there's no social distancing. Everybody accepts that that's the case. Washing your hands isn't quite enough. And it's also been proven that this new strain, you know, it's an airborne strain. So it's just not enough to wash your hands. And yet we are actually actively told we are not to wear face coverings or masks. So, okay, you take that into consideration, but they're not facilitating schools making safe decisions for their staff members. And all they talk about on every press conference is that it doesn't affect children as badly as adults, which is true. But who do they think are in schools working with those children? Yeah. Adults. So therefore, what they're actually saying, without saying it, is that they're happy to sacrifice the adults who work with children, you know, and take them, the ones that die or the ones that are ill or have long, complicated issues to do with COVID. They're happy to take that as collateral damage, because the main thing is that people who want to go to work and put their children in school, so that the government don't have to pay the people to stay at home with their children. Because online learning is up and running. We were told that had to be done by October. Schools that all the land up and down have done it. And it's been proven, because bubble closures have shown that it works. You know, now the lockdown shows that it works. It works. Online learning works. It is not ideal for everyone. Of course it isn't ideal. Who on earth would say it was ideal? However, when balanced against safety and transmission rates in the community for an illness that is overwhelming the NHS, it is definitely the best possible solution. So online learning works. Why would you not take advantage of something that you've instructed every school to do? There's only one possible reason, and that is economic. And I think, again, the strange decision making around things like, for example, school teachers have not been, or school staff have not been prioritised for the vaccine. If you want to keep schools open and you want to insist that nobody wears a mask in a school, why would you not vaccinate those people? Because what happens is people get sick. So if a teacher or a teaching assistant gets the virus, they go off sick with it. Their entire bubble is then off and inconveniencing their parents at home, because what else can they do? You know, aside from the fact that makes it really unviable, lacks viability as an organisation, you're then putting people at risk of complications, of, you know, transferring it out into the community. You know, children may not show the symptoms, but if they're carrying it, it could easily be taken home. To, you know, and we've got people who've had babies, who've got siblings who are unwell and vulnerable at home, and so on and so forth. And I think, you know, if you're going to say it's okay for schools to be open, then vaccinate the people who work in them to try and protect them. If you're going to say that they're not allowed to wear a mask, but they're not interested in any of that. Literally, they're not interested in anybody to do with education. They're not giving us the funding for laptops. They could have done that. They could have given, they do all of our census data in October. The government know every single head teacher's email. They email us relentlessly all through the holiday, day and night. They do what they like. They know every single email. They know exactly how many children are in each school. They could have worked out an algorithm that gave money to schools to say this money has to be spent on laptops. We'd have bought them 9 months ago, but they didn't. It's about control. And what's happened, what's been announced at the weekend? That the contract for laptops has gone to a Conservative supporter with absolutely no tender process whatsoever. Now, even me, with my little couple of £1 million budget here in school, I would not be allowed to award a contract to anybody for anything without 3 tenders coming in to me. And I'm a little teacher. And yet the government of our country can do it to their buddies, and, you know, 9 months after the fact. It's ridiculous. And inciting people to complain about schools. Whose idea was that? When I heard him say it, part of me was incensed with anger. You know, I was apoplectic. And then part of me laughed, because I thought, this is hilarious. I wonder if he's told Amanda Spielman that she's about to be inundated, A, with complaints, or B, with people doing the opposite, which is actually, I'm not going to complain to you, I'm going to tell you how good my child's school is. And obviously she was clueless about that decision. And what kind of a man, what kind of a human being in a situation like this pits the investigating authority, the assessing authority against a school who, when they were given no notice to close? What kind of a human being does that? What kind of a policy is that? That is a policy about power and about control. And, you know, one way of making sure that schools know who is in charge is by them changing the guidance at the last minute, moving the goalposts all the time, keeping us under pressure so that we can't fight back. And that's what our unions do on our behalf, because whilst we are at the chalk face, they are there in the background working on our behalf. And I am not a union person in terms of let's strike as in the old-fashioned idea of being in a union. No, I'm not. But I think unions serve an extremely important purpose at the moment in being our advocates, particularly on the topic of safety.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's shocking, isn't it, really? I mean, obviously, you're talking about what kind of Gavin Williamson said to parents to report their schools. I mean, I find it quite disgusting, to be honest with you. I mean, ultimately, teachers and schools have tried to do their utmost best to try to support these kids and actually risk their lives. I mean, there's some of these vulnerable teachers that have been on the front line with these kids, are kind of being thrown into the pits in some respects. And it's such a shame. I mean, like Matt Hancock came out the other day and said, and praise Gavin Williamson for the wonderful job he's doing. I mean, what is it with these politicians? Like, I mean, why is it that they try to blame everyone else, but they don't actually hold themselves accountable for the mess they've made?
Well, I think, I mean, that's laughable, isn't it? I did laugh at that. I literally, in fact, I can feel myself laughing now, because if they must be the only people in the entire country who are able to congratulate one another with no irony whatsoever. Like the rest of the Western world is looking at that thinking, are they mad? Are they actually mad? Are they completely detached from reality? Because how can you possibly congratulate people for the absolute mess we are in? It is beyond a joke. They're clearly completely detached from the real world. And in some ways that's quite sad. And in other ways, considering that they're running our country, it doesn't bode well, does it? Let's be honest. I like to think that even in my job here, I like to keep informed about things. I like to keep on top of things. I like to work in a collaborative way. The head teachers the kind of heroic head teachers who do all the decision making, make all the plans and lead with a rod of iron, they're a thing of the past largely now. Most of us know that in order to do the job and to make that job sustainable for the long term, you need a team. And I am passionate about my team here. They complement my weaknesses, they reinforce my strengths, and I think that is what a team does. Now, you're not telling me, any good team does that in any walk of life. You're not telling me that suddenly when we're talking about the team that runs our country, all of that leadership expectation goes out the window. How? It's ridiculous to think that. And yet they all sit there, self-congratulatory, patting one another on the back for a job well done. When we sat here on the weekend, there was 80,000 people who've lost their lives in this country. 80,000 people. And you might say, oh, it's difficult. I wouldn't want to lead a country like that. No one said it was easy. No one said leadership was easy. No one said making the right decision was easy. And sometimes the right decisions are really hard and make you really, really unpopular. And if you're trying to win a popularity contest and it's all about votes and about you looking great, then you're never going to do it right. You have to work with integrity. And unfortunately, no one has seen any evidence of integrity from this government, not one shred. There they were on Sunday morning. So I was interviewed on the BBC. I was interviewed about, for example, laptops. And the Conservative MP, who straight after me was questioned, made up a complete lie. That we were the highest, the most densely populated, or, that there was a shortage of laptops. I could go now and buy a laptop. If I had the money, I could go and buy 10 laptops. I don't have the money. So that's a complete lie. And no one challenges their mistruths, their untruths. No one's challenging that. No one's challenging this, the money go round that there's become indicative of this pandemic. No one. And one day it will happen. At the moment, everybody's got their heads down. We're trying to work through this all. But one day it will happen. And people will stop and look at this situation and think it was an outrage. It was an absolute civic outrage, the way we've been led through this, because the decision making at every level has been, all over the place. It's like buckshot. Oh, we'll do this. There's been no clear plan at all, no strategy and no collaboration. And if you want the best possible plan, any good leader will know you come to your team with an idea and your team make your plan a reality. And that plan needs to be well thought through, well executed, and all the questions that you are likely to be asked need to already have the answers when you're giving out the information. You do not give a plan or give an outcome and then for everybody to be looking around saying, where's the guidance for this? And then just say it'll be out soon at some point. All that does is cause confusion, anxiety, unnecessary stress and worry at a time when that's the last thing that everyone needs. You know, the parents on Monday night of children who are doing GCSEs, A-levels, etc., were pulling out their hair. All they were told was, yeah, they're all cancelled.
Yeah.
Who makes an announcement like that without some kind of plan behind it? Having taken no notice of anybody in the sector, not one secondary school colleague was consulted that I know of to say, listen, what should we do if we cancel exams? What will we do? They've been asking since the start of the year. And what makes it so, what highlights it so much is, of course, Scotland and Wales have had a totally different approach. Scotland, they've known for months that there'd be no exams and they've been doing formative assessments as they go. Everyone's known in Scotland. Everyone knew in Scotland weeks before the Christmas when they would close and when they would open. They all knew it'd be remote learning for a couple of weeks. So there was no stress. Everybody just sailed into the new year and understood exactly what was going to happen. England, you know, everyone was clueless. For some schools, hundreds of children went back on Monday and mixed up all of those households, all of that, only to be told Monday night, you're not coming in. For some schools, Tuesday was spent planning. So all the children had to spend a day at home with working parents, no notice at all. Luckily for me, I held firm and refused to change my inset day to the Friday before Christmas. Why would I do that? Staff are entitled to high quality professional development and training, and ours was booked for the first Monday back. They're entitled to it and they had it and they really enjoyed it. And lo and behold, one of my staff members lost their mum to COVID last week, and the training that we did on Monday really helped her to process that. She sent me an email over the weekend to thank me and said it really couldn't have come at a better time. So am I glad I stuck to my guns? Yes, absolutely. My senior leadership team missed out on the training because all of our union staff, all of our staff came back with their union letters and said, yeah, we're not going to come in as of tomorrow. I didn't grudge that. I said, that's fine, as long as I know I can now make a plan. I involved my governors and I said, look, we're going to have to close. We can open to key worker children, that's it, and vulnerable. And that's what we planned on Monday. So in actual fact, it didn't change anything for us that the government announced it on Monday night, but that was simply luck. That was simply luck that I'd said before Christmas, we're not for the sake of one day. No, all the disruption to working parents for a day before Christmas. And all my parents here were so grateful. They said, oh, thank goodness, how would I have found childcare for a day before Christmas? It wouldn't have been possible. So actually, it worked out brilliantly for us. But I know that there are lots of colleagues who were thrown into disarray Monday night, didn't sleep, spent all of Tuesday planning. Their children had no learning. For us, no learning was lost. Children were straight in on Tuesday with remote learning, but that's not the case in all schools. And I just think, who are these people to do these make these foolish decisions and do these foolish things to us with no collaboration with the sector whatsoever? Not one person in a special school, a PRU, an earlier setting, nobody. They've got their yes men who give them essentially what is an echo chamber, just saying exactly what they want to hear with no kind of basis in any kind of reality, which is frustrating, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously you got Gavin Williamson sort of telling parents to report schools. I mean, it's almost trying to hold schools accountable for the mess he's made. But I mean, at what point do we start holding Gavin Williamson accountable for the mess that they've made in education? Because ultimately, I know you're saying that heads right now and teachers right now are just trying to get on with their job because it's such a difficult time, but is this not the time to start holding them accountable? Because this is
I think I certainly think there's a place for that to happen. Equally, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I am a sensible person. And what I always wonder about politics is if decisions are made on purpose. And I'll tell you the reason why I think it. So obviously, you have the likes of Boris Johnson, who did not support Theresa May, even though she was his colleague. They're both in the same party, and they both theoretically wanted the best for our country based on their party, their doctrine and what have you. He didn't support her plan. However, now that he's messed everything up and we're at the 11th hour, her plan was the one that, her Brexit deal was the one that went through. And, he felt that was some kind of success. That was a plan that someone else drafted up that you didn't support at the time. However, you've squeezed that through and through the back door and tried to make it nobody notice, because under the smokescreen of everybody focusing on schools and the absolute furore that took place over schools. So if you're busy making a mess over here, what you want to do is cause a distraction over here, so everyone's focused that way while you can get, hide this mess. And I wonder if he knew all along he was planning to close schools, but the way it's been done, he's thought, well, it's the least resistance, it's the path of least resistance. And whilst everybody's focusing on schools and all of that drama, we'll take that hit because we've got the Brexit deal through without too much fuss. I think it was always the plan. And that's not me being a conspiracy theorist. That's me just thinking, how can anybody think they've got any credibility by, hijacking a colleague's plan that you didn't even support? And it's not the greatest of plans, let's be honest. It's not the greatest of plans at all. And no one's batting an eyelid. So I think there's a cause at the moment. There is a case to be had, I guess, of saying all of our current government needs to be held to account, from Boris Johnson all the way through. Gavin Williamson, how successful was he as the Secretary of State for Defence? Was he successful? I think he wasn't. I think he ended up getting kicked out of that job because he clearly was clueless at that, and he isn't showing himself as being any more clued up in this particular role either. And I think what happens if people haven't got a clue and refuse to work collaboratively with people who have, is that they just make mess after mess after mess. And it's people like me who want it to work, not because I want his policies to work, not at all. I want it to work because I've got a school full of children who rely upon it working. They rely upon it. I've got a school full of parents who need things to work so that they can go to work and not fret about the safety of their children, and not fret about their children bringing home a virus that could kill them or their grandma or someone else. So that's why it needs to work. I'm invested in that. I'm not invested in the government policies one iota. I think it's utterly ridiculous. And the only good outcomes for this are that things like standardized tests have been cancelled for this year. That should have happened at the start of the year. Everybody could see that this year was going to be disrupted. Everybody could see it, but the government refused, absolutely point blank refused. So people like me and more than a score have campaigned since September to have statutory assessments scrapped for this year. We didn't quite get there with the year 2 phonics screening. Obviously that happened in December. And again, utter joke. My whole year 2 bubble, 100 people, off for 2 weeks because someone in the year group tested positive for COVID. Off for 2 weeks. Came back to school, and instead of focusing on learning and catching on learning, what do they have to do? A week and a half where every single child was tested one-to-one for phonics. How is that a productive, healthy use of anybody's learning time? It isn't, is it? But that's what the government insisted on happening. I just think it's pathetic. They're not listening to us, and they need to. So at what point do we hold them to account? I think that point is rapidly approaching. And I think, the fact that I saw today, they keep refusing the Freedom of Information requests about COVID deaths in school staff. What is it they're trying to hide? And I think once that information does become public, I think at that point, that's when, our unions, and rightly so, will start to challenge them. And eventually the tide turns. And I don't think any parent this week has been happy with how this has been handled. No parent has been happy, because why on earth would anybody be happy having seen the figures rise and rise and rise and waited for the announcement and it didn't come? All the children get thrown back into school. And then that night the announcement happens. You've got no time to arrange alternative childcare. You're absolutely stressed to the max. People are losing their jobs, fear of losing their homes. Do they need the added hassle? No, of course they don't. So I think the time is coming when the peer pressure and the pressure of the population will start to make questions rise to the surface, and they'll have to answer them.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's just a crazy time to be in general for schools, isn't it? I mean, like this whole vaccination situation, not being a priority, being on the priority list as a teacher. I mean, that is, how frustrating is that? Because ultimately, you are on the front line. And next, after NHS staff, you are next on the front line, aren't you? So, and I mean, like they looked at, I think when they made the announcement who was going to be in that first group, they based it off the 88% of the people that died. So they targeted 88% of the people that died over the last 12 months or so. But ultimately, the new mutation of the virus is targeting different sets of people. So, I mean, why are we basing it off like the previous results, and why are we not focusing on the people that it's affecting now? And obviously, there's such a high case of it affecting children now, opposed to the first time round. So why are we not looking at that and protecting teachers?
I'm not sure. I mean, I know that there are people in every sector who would argue that their sector should be prioritised, obviously. So the over 80s, the very vulnerable, and so on and so forth. I get that. But all the way through this, the government have focused on economic viability and maintaining, the kind of integrity of our economy. So if your focus has all the way along been maintaining the integrity of the economy, and we know that in order to do that, children need to be in school, then I'd say the two priorities need to be anybody who's in the NHS, like you said, the frontline workers that are actually helping people who are ill, definitely them, followed very swiftly by people who are going to facilitate workers going back to work, which is school staff. Yeah. So yes, I agree that the vulnerable and the elderly should definitely be targeted. Some of them haven't been out of their homes since March, and I think that is appalling. I went mad after 10 days in my house, and I'm a young person. But, if you are elderly, it must be terribly, terribly lonely. But equally, I know several elderly people, quite a lot of elderly people actually, all of whom have said to me, I would happily stay in my house for another 4 weeks if it meant that all of you people in education were vaccinated so that all the children get back to school. Because most elderly people have got an enormous sense of community spirit and real civic duty in their bones. They were raised that way. So I'm sure that most of them would selflessly put themselves behind somebody who could potentially run a school or keep a school ticking over, because most of them think very highly of the young people that we look out for. A lot of them are grandparents and would want their grandchildren in school and so on. I'm not saying there's a right answer for that, but what I am saying is, in terms of prioritizing, there perhaps could have been a bit of a rethink about that. Because as I say, if you're insisting that people work in a primary school without a mask, which is basically putting themselves at risk, mixing with 30 households minimum in a day, why wouldn't you protect them either with a mask, which is slight protection, or with a vaccine, which offers another layer of protection? Does that make sense? So I'm not saying that the elderly should be last on the list. On the contrary, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, if your whole focus the whole time through has been economic viability, then why aren't they focusing on the people who are providing that economic viability? And then other key workers, people that need to travel to support any kind of business and for finance or for any Brexit reasons or so on and so forth. I think those are the people that perhaps should have been prioritised. If they're prioritised for school places because they're important, and if we are prioritised because we need to keep schools open, then surely we should be prioritised for a vaccine.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, what do you think we need to do? Because I think as a country, we've been individualistic for such a long time, and well, since like the beginning of time, in some respects in the UK, like we've always been an individualistic kind of culture. But I think more than ever, I think a collaboration needs to happen, in particular in education, for us to move forward. I mean, like, how do we go about doing it? Because how do we go about doing it?
Well, I think what tends to unite people is a common goal. And I think it's sad that there are two key things that could have united the whole country, really, in the last 12 months. One of those is Brexit, and one of those is the COVID response. And I think had it been originally a cross-political approach to either of those things, had there been teams of people working on different aspects of that, rather than just one party trying to exercise power and control, I think we'd be in a completely different position now. Unfortunately, this has been completely focused on exercising power as opposed to, as you say, collaboration. What's happening now is that people are realizing that with collaboration actually comes collective power. So last weekend, for example, when 2 or 3 unions got together and said, listen, we can't let this happen. This is actually now endangering lives, and we cannot allow it to perpetuate. When 2 or 3 unions got together, behind them were tens of thousands of people saying, we're behind you, we are with you. And you can't ignore that. So I think collaboration comes from common goal. And obviously at the moment, the common goals are things like safety and you can't argue with that, because nobody wants to put their lives at risk unnecessarily. Nobody wants to do that.
Yeah.
And I think now is a good time, and the economic viability of the country. But you see, then you have to work with people's egos. And I think, unfortunately, the people in power, their egos far outweigh any kind of interest in the longevity of their policy making. If they could see beyond their term in office, if they could see, 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the line, even the next generation, because it'll be my children's children who are paying for this pandemic. This will be like war reparations. 2 generations down the line, we'll be paying back the money we've had to borrow to prop up our economy. And I think that's all very well, as long as the decision making has been based on the science, and really the science, not just the government's fake science or what they've hidden or what they've decided to share, actual facts of the science, and they are available to the whole world. Because it's not just England that's been looking at this. This has been looked at by the entire world. Every country in our world has looked at this. So if you had a team of people that were looking at it, then you'd have some sensible and some honest scientific outcomes that you could then perhaps make a plan based upon. And I could be extremely naive, but I don't see how other countries have managed it unless it is possible. And I don't mean, countries where dictatorships are in existence and you can actually force people to stay home and it's a martial state. I mean countries like ours, islands like ours, New Zealand, for example, case in point. Our borders have only just recently begun to start to look like they're closing. Is that Brexit? Is it the pandemic? Who knows? Only now we're starting to test people at airports. Nearly a year after the other countries started that. Yeah. Why are we so slow? We're meant to be. Who do we think we are that we're world leaders? We're not world leaders at all. We're a laughing stock in the world because of the behaviour of our government. And if it wasn't just their egos that were involved, if people were actually trying to think about the long term and trying to think about the legacy that they've left, then I think it'd be a different story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think we need to come together as a profession in some respects, don't we? We need to come together and actually just say, you know what, enough's enough. I mean, what part do you think the DfE have to play in all of this?
Well, DfE are largely civil servants, aren't they? And I think they are dictated to by government rhetoric and government, doctrine. I think it's a shame that the people who advise the government on that doctrine are not education professionals. Mm. They are people that have been placed, or they are people that are already yes men. And you don't need more yes men, you just don't. If I had a room full of yes men on my senior leadership team, I'd be half the leader that I am. I want people to challenge me and ask me questions and say, have you considered? And for me to think, actually, I haven't. I'm glad you've raised that, because that now brings something else to mind, because I'm only interested in making the best possible decisions. I'm not interested in me looking brilliant, or, me outdoing the school next door, or me being first, or our school. I'm not interested in that, because it's not about my ego. This is about the people that we serve, our communities and our children. And I think if that was the mindset of people in government, then they're the kind of people that they would employ in the DfE. The whole systemic culture needs. And I think if you're only interested in your own name, in making yourself known in the history books, whether that's for good or bad reasons, and I'm going to say this now, I doubt anybody will have anything good to say about any member of this government in time to come, because what good have they done? We only have the evidence to go off. It's not great. And it's not that it's irreversible. It's entirely reversible. It's entirely reversible, the damage that they've done. But they've got to work in a different way. And we haven't seen evidence of that happening at all. It's more lies, more smoke screens, more mirrors, more empty words. So I can't see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, you say it's reversible. What steps do you think we need to take now to reverse the mess that's been made?
Well, I think the lockdown restrictions need to be clear. I think they're way too wide and way too woolly. There is no lockdown at the moment, is there? Let's be honest. I still see cars on the roads, food shops are open. And I'm not saying that that it's not going to damage businesses, but businesses are being damaged anyway. They are, because this is dragging on a long time. And I think in some ways it's like gangrene. You can keep trying to save that leg, keep trying to save the toe, the foot, the leg, keep trying to save it, and it's rotting and it's causing systemic damage long term. or you can take the very brave decision to remove the leg at a certain point and save that person's life. And I think the gangrene of this issue is traveling. It's traveling in every aspect of our lives, not just the economic aspect, but the human aspect. People's relationships are ending. People aren't able to start relationships. People's families are under pressure. Their mental health is being damaged irreparably. You know, healthcare for those with chronic illnesses, leukemias, cancer, other kinds of cancers that can't be treated, diagnoses for cancers, liver conditions, kidney problems, all of those things that are chronic and ongoing are all being impacted on. If our NHS is overwhelmed, then every service we offer to people who are unwell is also overwhelmed. Yeah. You know, it's all very well the government saying, oh, it doesn't affect young children. Okay, that's brilliant, but it affects the NHS. So if the NHS is full and someone's in a car crash, where do those people go in that car crash? Because car crashes are still going to happen, aren't they? So what happens then? What we just say, well, never mind. You know, young, but we won't worry about people having car crashes or any kind of heart attacks or anything. It's utterly small-minded to think that this isn't having an impact on everything else in life. So the short term is we need to do something very decisive and make it clear that the rules are very clear for everybody to follow. Stay at home, the end. Pay people to keep their children at home. You know, the only children that should be in school should be the very, very bare minimum to minimize that mixing up and that transmission. And people should be forced to stay at home. And that's what should happen. And bearing in mind, this is coming from somebody who hates being indoors, who's a very active person. Do I want to do it? No, I don't. Would I do it for a month rather than keep this going for 3 months more? 100% yes. I want my life back. Who doesn't? The only way it's going to happen is everyone gets on board. Who wants to get on board? We're all sick to death. The only way we're getting on board is if we're coerced into doing it, and that is what needs to happen. They need to find that last bit of money and that last bit of integrity that they've got and say, right, stay home, let's try and end this in the next 2 to 3 months, get everybody vaccinated who needs to be vaccinated, and think about us getting back to normal being schools being up and running because everyone's been vaccinated, key workers able to go to work, and on we go, then slowly phase into the rest of the country being back to normal by the summer.
Yeah, my only worry about that, Vic, is I mean, we don't seem to learn from our mistakes. I mean, it would have just been the simple option last year. I mean, I know the economy is important, but ultimately, if they just put things like just lock things down for an extended period of time, and maybe even went into lockdown a week or two early last year, maybe we wouldn't be in this mess, and people could reopen their businesses like safely and obviously following regulations and guidelines, of course. But maybe they would be in a completely different position. The problem is that it's back and forth and too many U-turns and no clarity. I think obviously, like you said, there's just been no clarity and understanding, or there's no real transparency on what metrics they use and how they come to these decisions. And there's just a lot of this, we're listening to these scientific advice, we listen to the scientific advice and we're listening to the education professionals, but every time I ask somebody in education, like who do you know anyone that sort of given this advice, they're like, it's absolute rubbish. And then in terms of the scientific advice, how many articles have you read that where advisors have come out and said this is completely against the advice that we've given them? So I mean, I don't know where they kind of find their facts, but the problem is that you're right. I mean, they're not kind of listening to the people that know their stuff, and ultimately I just don't see it changing until there is a stand and people kind of unite and get together and say, you know what, enough's enough, because they try to very much put like they try to hold everybody else accountable, but I genuinely think it's time that we kind of held them accountable. Like especially when I'm talking to people from across different countries, and they like are telling me how they've like had systems that have worked and they've put education at the top priority compared to like the economy. I mean, it's remarkable what this country prioritizes as important, and what they've done and the mess that they've made. So hopefully we can shed some light and actually come together and actually overturn some of the decisions like the union done last week, because what's happening right now, unfortunately, just isn't good enough.
No. I think the next turn is probably going to be on early years, on the topic of early years, because that's ridiculous, utterly ridiculous. So we'll see. But yeah, I think you're right. I do. I think it's astonishing the way we've all been treated, and the fact that no one's actually paused to question it, because everybody's we're so sympathetic in Britain, aren't we? We're so, oh, I'm sure he's doing his best. We're so kind of tolerant, and, we don't stand up and argue or fight. We stand in queues quite sensibly. We're not kind of hustling or anything. And I think that's both a good thing and also a bad thing. I think there are times when we should be stamping our feet and saying, what on earth is this about? I don't agree. What are you doing to us? And questioning it. And, you know, perhaps people are beginning to reach the end of their tether. As I say, if your business is going under, your house is at risk, your marriage is going under, your relationship, whatever, I think those are the starts of the points in time where people think, what on earth, when is this over? And it's not going to be over. It won't be over for a long time unless the government take a grip of it. And it's not, you know, we'll never get back what we've lost, but this situation, the dire situation we're in, is reversible. It could be turned around with some decisive action and listening to people who know best in various different fields. Like you say, I mean, there's Chris Whitty over Christmas. They sacked him. Didn't they sack him? I don't know, whoever they sacked anyway. I could be wrong, it might not be Chris Whitty, but anyway, one of the people that they sacked was working in a hospital over Christmas. And I think that's the kind of guy who needs respect, because the government got rid of him, but he's the very guy who was saying, this is really dangerous, what what you're doing, what's happening. And I think he exemplifies everything that went wrong. If you sack somebody who's not telling, who's not saying what you want them to say, who's actually saying I disagree, and you sack them because they're not towing the party line, that's no good, is it?
Absolutely. I mean, I do question sometimes whether people are free to actually question things, because it might end up resulting in them sort of losing their positions. And I genuinely feel that in some respects that happens in education, because you don't want to step out of line, because the governors might end up sort of stripping you from your headship in some respects. Or, I just feel like there's this massive amount of, you've got to be a yes person to what the government say, otherwise you're going to be penalised. I mean, I think, like, how are we going to change that mentality in the UK?
Well, I think there's that old expression, isn't there, that something along the lines of the only thing that's needed for bad things to happen is for good people to turn a blind eye, or something along those lines. And I'm sure someone will correct you with the exact expression, but I think through fear of being penalised or punished, there are perhaps a lot of people who don't speak out. But I mean, I don't know. I'm never unprofessional with what I say. I'm never, I never bring my profession into disrepute, but I will always tell the truth. So, I mean, I could be accused of speaking out against the government, but actually, what am I saying that isn't true? So what? How could I be punished for telling the truth, or the truth as far as I see it? And I think that what the government rely on mostly is that people are indoctrinated in schools into towing the line, and all the children are just taught the same stuff to just be able to basically follow the rules and not question anything, because that's what they want. They want submissive people, a submissive population that just do as they're told. And I think that, largely maybe that happens, but there are a few people who should challenge that, and sensibly and without causing violence or riots or whatever. But I mean, I think that there are times when the status quo does need a challenge, and I think now is one of those times. I think absolutely now is one of those times, because what will happen now is that we will prove that we do not need standardized tests in order to teach well. We don't need them. I mean, what did I read today? Ofsted, in a pandemic with transmission rates through the roof, Ofsted are planning to come into people's schools, actually into their schools,
bonkers,
to inspect. Where? I can't see my family, but Ofsted can come over and see me. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of point out, and just to kind of not correct you, but to point out, really, you're not kind of going against the government, but you're a leader of your community, and in some respects, you have a moral duty, and I think that's the kind of and you take pride in that in some respects, but you go out of your way and above and beyond to try to make sure you're looking after your community and your children and their parents and their families, and so the place that you're coming from is a place. It's from a good place, isn't it? I mean, you're trying to make sure you're going to do the best for your kids and your families, but ultimately you've got people in power that aren't doing the best for them. So you're not necessarily trying to argue against them, but you are trying to stand for your people, and I completely respect that. And ultimately, I think there needs to be a lot of change, but the Ofsted thing is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, their whole like perception of how they work in education needs to change. They need to stop working as a judge, but they need to start becoming a supportive friend to the education profession. Like the high stakes accountability, it's just causing unnecessary pressure for no reason. I mean, it's almost not allowing teachers to be teachers. I mean, you almost have to like try to get children to become a product of the system in some respects, and it's not fair on the children, it's not fair on the community, but it's especially not fair on the teachers. But look, we'll leave it there, Vic. I mean, I know you've kind of you're a head teacher, so you've got loads of stuff to do, but I mean, is there anything you want to say just before we call it?
No, I don't think so. Just I put out a little video when some of the guidance was coming out, over the Christmas holiday, and a lot of people were quite worried and quite concerned, and I thought, there's only one way we're going to get through this, and that is by working together, or by at least supporting one another. And already in the last week, even given the amount of work we've had to do and the hugely increased workload, I've been calling people who've been absolutely threaders on Twitter and on LinkedIn and stuff, and people have been reaching out to one another. And I think it's just a call to everybody to say, maybe today I'm in a good place and I can offer my energy and my support to someone else. Maybe tomorrow it'll be me needing that little bit of support. And I think there's no shame in saying that we're having a bad day, or that we need that little bit of care, or just someone giving us a little boost in the day, and just to make sure that to be there for others, because the government aren't going to come and look out for us. We've only got ourselves to look out for one another, and it's just about making sure that we know that, and that we're there for one another. Really, that's all I'd say.
Yeah, and just to kind of reiterate, I mean, I had a lady that came on the podcast, and by the end of the podcast, she kind of said thank you, because I don't feel like anybody's listening, or I'm allowed to speak, and it's such a shame within the profession that so many teachers feel that way. I think more than ever we've absolutely got to be more empathetic towards each other and support each other to be able to feel free to feel it's okay not to be okay, and to support each other. So I think you're absolutely right, and that's great advice, Vic. Guys, I mean, thanks for coming on, and guys, thanks for watching as usual. But yeah, Vic, I mean, it's always been a pleasure, and obviously we'll stay in touch over social media. I mean, we tend to kind of have a line thought, so yeah, hopefully we can continue to work together and collaborate. But yeah, amazing. Thanks for coming on.
And I hope not too many people are jealous of my lovely Christmas lights that I'm not taking down.
I think they're probably jealous of your bun.
Oh yeah, my crunch ball bun. Oh my life. Yeah.
Bye everyone.